A company had been robbed from the inside for years, and nobody could find the wound. 12 young accountants with the finest software combed the books for a month and came up with nothing at all. Then one quiet old woman sat down at the end of the table. She did not open a laptop. She did not run a single program. She opened one thick ledger, and she looked at it for almost an hour in complete silence. Then she set her finger on a single line and said quietly, "There it is." She had read almost nothing. And she was right. Her name was Vera, and the whole firm told stories about her. She worked in a way that made the young analysts uncomfortable. She would switch off her phone, turn her screen to the wall, and simply stare at one page as though it might speak. She was slow. She was old-fashioned. She ignored half the tools they swore by. And yet, again and again, she found the buried thing that a dozen faster people had walked straight past. Nobody could explain it. They shrugged and called it instinct, or luck, or some gift you were simply born with. Marcus did not believe in gifts. He believed in vigilance, in watching everything at once, and never letting a single number slip by unguarded. So when he stood at the back of that room and watched an old woman find in 1 hour what he had missed in a month, one question began to burn in him and would not go out. How does someone who looks at less somehow see more? How does she catch what 12 pairs of racing eyes cannot? Marcus was about to find out. And the answer would feel almost unfair. To understand why it stung so badly, you have to understand Marcus. He had joined the firm hungry and certain, sure that whoever watched the hardest would catch the most. And he did watch hard. He kept a dozen tabs open at once, alerts flashing, spreadsheets scrolling, his eyes darting between them like a man guarding a wall on every side. He told himself this was what sharpness looked like. But lately the sharpness had frayed into a low, humming anxiety. He was tired all the time. And more often, things were slipping past him. Then came the mistake he could not take back. A fraud slipped through his review, a clean and simple theft sitting in plain sight, in a file he had signed off on himself. When they showed it to him afterward, his stomach turned, because he had looked right at that page. His eyes had passed over the very line. But in that moment 3 other windows had been pulling at him, a message had buzzed, and his attention had skated across the surface and moved on. He had seen it, and somehow he had not seen it at all. So Marcus did what he always did. He decided the answer was more. More monitors. More alerts. More coverage, so that nothing could ever hide from him again. He arrived earlier and stayed later, eyes flicking across an ever wider wall of numbers, certain that if he could just watch enough screens at once, he would finally be safe. He was spreading his attention thinner and calling it diligence. He was trying to guard a whole city by standing in every street at the same time, and wondering why the thief kept getting through. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, everything changed. Vera stopped beside his desk, glanced once at his wall of glowing screens, and said she wanted him to shadow her on a difficult case for a full week. Marcus's heart leapt. Finally, a chance to prove himself. He immediately reached to grab his laptop and his tablet both. But the old woman shook her head slowly and said something he would never forget. "Leave those. Bring 1 notebook and 1 pen. You are already watching far too much." And then she walked away, leaving him staring at his own blinking screens, more confused than honored. Of course, Marcus did not really listen. Old habits are always louder than good advice. The next morning he showed up at her office with his laptop under his arm and his phone in his pocket, already buzzing. Vera looked at the laptop, then at him, and something between amusement and quiet pity crossed her face. She did not scold him. She simply pointed to a chair and said, "Sit." Then she opened a single ledger, turned her phone face down, and went completely still. For 20 long minutes she did nothing but look. And Marcus nearly came apart in his chair. He could not stand it. "Shouldn't we scan all the accounts?" he blurted. "Run the software, cross-check everything, cover the whole file?" Vera did not look up from the page. "The software already looked," she said. "It found nothing. It found nothing because a fraud that survives is a fraud that has learned to look perfectly normal." She turned a single page. You cannot catch normal by looking faster, Marcus. You catch it by looking longer at one thing, until the wrongness that everyone else glides over finally rises up to the surface and shows itself to you. The mind loves what feels smooth, she went on, still gazing at the ledger. A clever thief knows this better than anyone. So he makes the numbers feel easy, balanced, familiar, exactly the way your tired eyes want them to feel. And when you skim, everything smooth slides right past you. Every fast pass blesses the lie. The only way through, she said, is to slow down until your mind begins to strain, because the truth is hidden precisely in the place that feels too easy. Comfort is where the thief buries the body. Strain is the shovel. She gave him an example so small it felt almost foolish. Read a sentence you have seen 100 times, she said, and you will never notice that the word appears in it twice in a row. Your eyes fill in what they expect and race ahead. Speed hides the doubled word completely. Only when you stop, and truly look, does it leap out at you, obvious and impossible to miss. A great fraud, she said, is nothing more than a doubled word buried in a book 1,000,000 pages long. It was always there. You simply never stayed long enough to see it. Something quietly shifted inside Marcus. He thought of his own mind in every review, split into a dozen slivers, each screen tugging at a piece of him, none of him ever fully landing anywhere. And then he pictured Vera's mind instead, gathered whole and steady onto a single line, like a lamp held perfectly still in a dark room. It was not that she had sharper eyes than he did. It was that she pointed her entire attention at one thing at a time, undivided, unhurried. Not more eyes. One steady, unbroken gaze. He had never once given a single number that. There is a cost you cannot see, Vera said, that you pay every single time your attention jumps. When you tear your mind off one thing to glance at another, a part of it stays snagged behind, still half on the first. So you are never really on the second thing either. You drag a smear of everything into everything, and you call that fog being busy. Marcus felt the words land like a stone. 3 years, he thought. 3 years of a dozen open tabs, and he had never once been fully present with a single figure in front of him. That night, buzzing with the idea, Marcus tried it for himself. And he did it badly. He sat down with one ledger, determined to concentrate, and his mind took off sprinting instead. His eyes moved down the page, 10 lines, 20, and he reached the bottom having absorbed nothing at all. He had mistaken moving his eyes for paying attention. He started over and drifted again, thinking of his phone, of the other cases, of dinner. An hour later he had turned many pages and truly seen none of them. He slumped back, sure he simply was not built for this. The next day he confessed the failure, half expecting to be laughed out of the room. Vera only nodded, as if she had been waiting for exactly this. You looked, she said gently, but you did not stay. Attention is not the first glance, Marcus. Anyone can glance. Attention is the second look, and the third, the willingness to keep studying one line even after your mind whispers that there is nothing here, move on. She held his eyes. Understand this. The fraud always lives in the exact place where your mind most wants to move on. That whisper is not boredom. It is the thief, asking you to leave. Then Vera did something he did not expect. She sat down and began to speak about herself, 30 years earlier. I was the fastest junior they had ever seen, she said quietly. They praised my speed. I was proud of it. And then one year I skimmed straight past the theft that emptied the savings of families who had trusted us, because I was too quick to slow down. She was silent a moment. My own mentor covered every screen on my desk with a single blank sheet of paper, and told me that slowness was not my enemy. It took me years to believe him. I am hoping it takes you far less. There is one last piece, she said, and it is the hardest. Once you learn to look, you must protect the looking. Every day I take 1 hour where the phone is in a drawer, the door is closed, and no one on this earth can reach me. One ledger. One question. For that hour I am gone. The others call it inefficient, she said with a faint smile. They interrupt me and think they are helping. But an attention that anyone can shatter at any moment is not attention at all. That one unbroken hour is worth more than the 10 scattered ones around it combined. Marcus went home that night and began again, slower this time, and far gentler with himself. He started with just one protected hour. Phone in a drawer in the other room. Doors shut. One ledger open, and nothing else in the world allowed in. At first it was agony, his mind clawing toward every absent screen. But he kept dragging it back, one line, then the next. By the third evening, something in his chest quietly loosened. The old panic of what am I missing everywhere else simply did not come. He was no longer guarding every street. He was standing still in one, and finally seeing it. Then came the night it finally clicked into place. The same crushing avalanche of files landed on his desk, the kind that once guaranteed a night of split, frantic scanning. But Marcus did not scan them the old, drowning way. He looked for the account that felt too smooth, the one that nothing had flagged, the one his tired eyes wanted to bless and skip. And he stayed with it. Minute after minute, past the whisper telling him to move on, deeper into the strain, until the numbers stopped feeling easy. And there, in the smoothness, a seam appeared. It was a chain of small transfers, each one flawless on its own, each one balancing to the penny, each one perfectly, beautifully innocent. But held together under a steady gaze, they formed a shape that could only be one thing. A theft, patient and quiet, hidden inside 100 honest-looking lines. Every fast pass in the building had glided right over it, because it had been built to feel smooth. Marcus had caught it not by covering more, but by covering less, and staying longer. The pile in front of him was no longer a threat to outrun. It was a locked room, and he had learned to wait until the door swung open. The change showed itself long before he ever said a word about it. He began arriving with a single slim notebook instead of an armful of devices. His phone lived in a drawer for hours at a stretch. He stopped missing things. He remembered the details of cases again, whole and clear, because his mind was no longer shattered into a dozen glowing pieces at once. His colleagues noticed almost at once. They asked if he was using some new software, some new system. He only smiled and told them he had started turning the software off for 1 hour a day. They laughed, certain it was a joke. It was not one. The real test came a month later, on a case the entire team had already closed. The numbers had been audited, the algorithms had passed it clean, and every senior partner had signed their name to it. But something in one account felt too smooth to Marcus, too easy, too eager to be blessed and forgotten. So he did the thing that once would have terrified him. He asked the partners for 1 uninterrupted hour alone with a file they had all declared perfectly clean. No team. No software. 1 ledger and his whole, undivided mind. The partners were skeptical, even annoyed. The case was closed, the client was satisfied, and here was a young man asking to reopen a wound that was not there. But they gave him his hour. And Marcus sat with that too smooth account, past the point where his mind begged him to agree it was fine, down into the strain, until the easy surface finally cracked. Underneath it lay a ring of perfectly balanced transfers, each innocent alone, together a slow and careful theft. He had found what 12 trained people and a machine had all looked at, and all had blessed. The room went very quiet, and it had nothing to do with boredom. One of the senior partners leaned forward and asked a hard, pointed question, the kind built to expose a lucky guess and collapse it. But Marcus did not flinch for even a second, because he was not clinging to a fragile hunch that one question could topple. He had sat with the thing until he understood its whole shape, every joint of it. He answered plainly, and the answer held. At the back of the room, near the door, Vera watched with her arms folded and the faintest trace of pride. She had stood on the other side of this exact moment, long ago. Later that week, a younger analyst caught Marcus in the hallway, a laptop open in his arms and a dozen tabs glowing on the screen, his eyes darting between them, ringed with exhaustion. "How do you do it?" the young man asked. "How do you stay so calm, and still catch so much?" Marcus knew that look instantly, because it had been his own not so long ago. He did not offer a clever trick. He simply reached out, quietly closed the young man's laptop, set a single page on top of it, and said, "Your mind can only truly see what it stops racing past. Start here." And the wheel turned once more. On Marcus's last evening shadowing her, Vera took him up to the old records room after everyone else had gone home. Dust hung in the last of the light, and rows of silent ledgers stretched into the dark. For a while neither of them spoke. Then the old woman said the words that Marcus would carry for the rest of his life. "I was never sharper than you," she said. "I never saw more than you. I simply learned to keep looking after everyone else had already looked away. That was the whole edge. Not better eyes. Just the patience to actually use the ones I was given." Marcus stayed in the records room a while after she had gone, watching the last light fade between the shelves. He thought of all the years he had spent trying to watch everything at once, believing that scattered, frantic vigilance was the same thing as truly seeing. And he understood now that it never had been. Attention is not a net you fling as wide as you can and hope. It is a single lamp, held steady, on one thing at a time. The people who seem to catch what everyone else misses are not watching more than you. They have simply learned to look at one thing long enough for the truth to rise. And that, in the very end, is the unfairest advantage of them all.